Chapter 1. The Volunteers. The ferry cut slowly through the grey water toward the island. 200 people stood along the rails and upper deck, watching the shoreline grow larger. Some leaned forward for a better look. Others stood quietly, arms crossed, trying to take in the scale of what they had signed up for. The island was bigger than most expected. At the center of it sat a town. Not a small village or research camp, but a full town. Streets ran in straight lines through rows of buildings. Houses stretched across neighborhoods. Larger structures rose above them, what looked like a hospital, a high school, and a shopping mall. From a distance, it looked abandoned. From closer range, it looked worse. Many buildings were damaged, windows were blown out, roofs were partially collapsed, burned cars sat scattered across intersections. Entire storefronts had been torn open, their signs hanging crooked or broken. Black scorch marks covered parts of the streets. The town looked like it had survived a war. A tall man near the front rail spoke first. "Jesus," he muttered. "They really went all out." Several people nodded. A woman with dark hair tied back stood nearby, studying the island carefully. Her name was Scarlett. She worked as an emergency room nurse in Chicago, and she had seen disaster scenes before. This place looked disturbingly real. Beside her stood a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head. Denzel leaned on the rail with both hands, scanning the buildings. "Looks like a bomb hit it," he said. Another voice came from behind them. "That's the point." The speaker was a tall man with long hair pulled into a loose tie. Keanu had been quiet for most of the trip, but he had spent the entire ferry ride studying the island. "They said it was supposed to look like a nuclear aftermath zone," he added. A woman a few feet away turned toward them. She wore sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. "That's exactly what it is," she said. "A set." Her name was Angelina, and she had already introduced herself to half the ferry during the trip. "An expensive one," she continued. "You know how much money this thing must have cost to build?" Denzel shrugged. "Probably a lot less than the prize money they're offering." That got a few smiles. The ferry horn sounded once as the vessel slowed. Ahead of them, a long concrete dock extended from the island's north shore. Several cargo containers sat stacked near the edge, along with a few parked trucks and equipment crates. A voice came over the ferry's loudspeaker. "Attention participants, we will be docking in approximately 3 minutes." Conversations quieted. The loudspeaker crackled again. "As a reminder, once you disembark, you will officially enter the 90-day simulation period. Communication with the outside world will not be available during the experiment. All monitoring will occur remotely." Several people exchanged looks. The voice continued. "You will have access to the entire town area. Supplies have been left throughout buildings to simulate what might remain after a major global disaster." Denzel leaned closer to the rail. "So basically, we're on our own." Scarlett nodded slightly. That was the agreement. The loudspeaker continued. "There will be no direct contact from the corporation during the 90-day period unless a catastrophic safety event occurs. Otherwise, the experiment will run uninterrupted until pickup." Angelina frowned. "Wait," she said, turning toward the group around her. "They're not even checking in on us?" Keanu answered before anyone else. "They said full blackout. That was in the contract." Angelina shook her head. "That's insane." The ferry engine slowed further as the vessel approached the dock. The loudspeaker spoke one last time. "Participants may disembark once the ramp is lowered. Good luck." The speaker clicked off. For a moment the deck was quiet, except for the sound of water against the hull. Then the ferry bumped gently against the dock. Metal clamps locked into place. The loading ramp lowered with a heavy mechanical whine. The 200 volunteers began walking down toward the island. Some moved with excitement. Others hesitated before stepping onto the concrete. Denzel stepped off the ramp and looked around. The dock area was silent. No staff waited to greet them. No cameras were visible. Only the abandoned equipment containers and a wide road leading inland toward the town. "Well," he said quietly, "I guess this is it." Scarlett stepped down beside him. The air smelled faintly of burned metal and salt water. Angelina joined them a moment later. "No guides, no instructions," she said. "They really meant it about the blackout." Keanu walked past them, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Town's that way," he said. The four of them followed the others up the cracked asphalt road. As they reached the top of the hill, the entire ruined town spread out below them. Burned vehicles, broken windows, silent streets. 200 people stood there looking down at it. The experiment had begun. Chapter 2. Exploring the ruins. Morning light spread slowly across the ruined town. The first night had passed without incident. Most of the participants had stayed near the shopping mall after arriving. It was the largest intact structure in town and the easiest place to gather everyone together. People slept in small groups along the mall corridors, some using jackets or bags as makeshift pillows. A few fires had been built outside in the parking lot, using broken wood from nearby debris. By sunrise, the energy had changed. Curiosity had taken over. 200 people could not stay in one building for long. Denzel stood near the mall entrance, watching groups organize themselves. Some participants had already started forming supply teams. Others were talking about claiming buildings for sleeping areas. A few people were studying maps printed on large signs near the mall entrance that showed the town layout. Scarlett stepped out of the mall, carrying a small backpack she had found inside one of the stores. "Looks like everyone's splitting up," she said. Denzel nodded. "Probably the smartest thing to do. Cover more ground." Angelina walked out behind them, tying her hair back. "This place is huge," she said. "There's no way they expect us to stay in the mall the whole time." Across the parking lot, a group of about 10 people began heading toward the residential district. Another group started walking toward the hospital building several blocks away. Keanu approached from the side of the mall holding a long metal flashlight. "Hardware store inside," he said. "Tools, too." Denzel raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" "Place was barely touched," Keanu replied. Scarlett looked toward the town streets stretching out ahead of them. Burned vehicles sat abandoned at intersections. Some were partially melted or crushed under debris. Storefront windows were shattered, their interiors dark and empty. Weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement. It looked exactly like the aftermath of a disaster zone. "Feels real," Scarlett said quietly. Angelina laughed. "That's because it's supposed to." She pointed toward the grocery store sign across the street. "Food first," she said. "Then we worry about sleeping arrangements." Denzel agreed. "Let's see what's left in there." The four of them crossed the street along with several other volunteers. The grocery store doors had been blown off their hinges. The interior was dim but not completely dark. Sunlight came through broken windows and holes in the ceiling. Inside, shelves still stood in long rows. Most of them were stocked, canned boxes of dry food, bottled water. Several people immediately began pulling items from the shelves. A man near the front laughed. "Okay, this is better than I expected." Scarlett walked slowly through the aisles, checking expiration dates on some of the cans. "Some of this could actually last years," she said. "Perfect apocalypse food." Angelina grabbed a basket and started loading it with bottled water. Denzel scanned the ceiling and walls out of habit. The building looked damaged but stable. "Place could feed everyone for weeks," he said. Near the back of the store, a freezer section still stood against the wall. A few participants had gathered around it, trying to pry open one of the doors. Keanu walked closer and examined the hinges. "Frozen stuff probably won't be good," someone said. Another man pulled harder on the handle. The heavy door creaked open. Inside were empty racks. No food, just darkness. "Well, that's disappointing," the man muttered. The group moved away, already losing interest. Elsewhere in the store, people continued gathering supplies. Denzel stacked several cases of bottled water near the entrance. "We should start bringing this back to the mall," he said. "Central storage." A woman nearby nodded. "Good idea." Outside, more volunteers walked through the streets, exploring other buildings. Some entered houses in the residential district. Others headed toward the hospital. The town slowly filled with movement. For most of the morning, the atmosphere stayed calm. People laughed. Some took pictures with personal cameras they had been allowed to bring before the blackout. Others discussed how long it might take to organize the town properly. Several people talked about creating a leadership group, a council. By midday, it almost felt like a community project. Denzel sat on the front steps of the grocery store, drinking bottled water while watching people move up and down the street. Scarlett joined him a moment later. "Hospital group found medical supplies," she said. "That's good." Angelina approached from the street. "You guys should see the high school," she said. "Huge gym, cafeteria, classrooms." Keanu came around the corner carrying a crowbar he had found. "Industrial district has warehouses too," he added. For a moment the four of them stood quietly looking at the town. 200 people were spread through the streets now, exploring, searching, claiming spaces. Angelina folded her arms. 90 days, she said. Denzel nodded slowly. "If everyone works together, it shouldn't be that bad." Scarlett agreed. "We've got food, buildings, water." Keanu looked down the empty street. "Yeah," he said. "Shouldn't be." By late afternoon, the town had spread the 200 participants across nearly every district. The mall remained the central meeting point, but smaller groups had moved outward to explore houses and apartment buildings in the residential area. Denzel had joined one of the exploration teams. 6 people moved down a narrow street lined with damaged apartment buildings. Burned vehicles sat half on the sidewalks. Some windows were boarded up, while others hung open with broken glass still clinging to the frames. The building they approached looked mostly intact. 4 stories. Concrete structure. The front door hung crooked, but still attached. "Looks stable enough," one of the men said. His name was Eric. Early 30s. One of the more confident volunteers. Denzel studied the doorway. The building had clearly taken damage during whatever staged disaster had been created for the town. The walls were cracked in places, but the structure didn't look like it was about to collapse. "Let's just be careful," Denzel said. Eric stepped inside first. Dust covered the hallway floor. A few ceiling panels had fallen, but most of the corridor remained open. The air inside smelled stale. 2 other volunteers followed him in. Denzel stepped through the doorway next. The hallway stretched straight ahead with apartment doors lining both sides. Some doors were already open. Others were closed. "Check for supplies," Eric said. "Anything useful." He walked toward the first closed door on the right. Scarlett had stayed back at the mall helping organize food supplies, so Denzel was the only one from the earlier group inside the building. Eric reached the door and grabbed the handle. Denzel noticed something just as the door started to move. A thin wire stretched across the frame. "Wait!" The word barely left his mouth. The wire snapped tight. There was a violent metallic sound above them. A heavy steel blade dropped from the top of the doorway frame. It moved so fast, most of them never saw it clearly. Eric's head separated from his body instantly. For half a second, his body remained standing. Then it collapsed forward onto the hallway floor. His head rolled across the dust-covered tile and struck the opposite wall. Blood sprayed across the corridor. No one spoke. No one moved. The hallway was silent except for the sound of something metal swinging slowly back and forth above the doorway. Then one of the volunteers screamed. Another stumbled backward into the wall. Denzel stood frozen, staring at the body. The blade hung from a hinge mechanism above the doorframe. A thin wire had clearly been attached to the door handle. When the door opened, it pulled the wire. The mechanism released. The blade dropped. It was simple, brutal, deliberate. Someone grabbed Denzel's arm. "We need to get out of here." The group rushed back down the hallway and out the front entrance. Once outside, several of them doubled over trying to breathe. One woman began crying uncontrollably. Denzel stood in the street looking back at the building. No one spoke for a moment. Then someone said the first thing that came to mind. "It was an accident." Another man nodded quickly. Yeah, it had to be. Some kind of structural failure. Or something holding the frame together. The explanations came fast now. No one wanted to say anything else, because the other explanation was worse. Denzel looked back toward the doorway. He could still see the blood through the opening. "Could have been some kind of support mechanism," one of the volunteers said nervously. "Old building, damaged frame." Another voice added, "Yeah, like a brace that snapped." They kept talking, trying to make the scene make sense. Trying to convince themselves they understood what had happened. Denzel didn't say anything. He had seen the wire. He had seen the blade hinge. That didn't look like a collapsing support beam, but the others needed the explanation. They needed it badly. After a few minutes, they began walking back toward the mall. The group moved quietly through the streets. When they arrived, dozens of participants were gathered outside, organizing supplies. The moment people saw their faces, they knew something was wrong. Scarlett approached first. What happened? One of the volunteers spoke. There was an accident. The crowd went silent. A building in the residential district, the man continued. Door frame collapsed. Scarlett looked between them. Where's Eric? No one answered immediately. Finally, Denzel spoke. He didn't make it. Scarlett closed her eyes for a moment. Angelina stepped forward. What do you mean, an accident? The volunteers explained what had happened. The wire, the blade, the door. But every description was followed by the same conclusion. It must have been structural. The building was damaged. These places aren't stable. Angelina frowned. That sounds like a trap. The group reacted immediately. No, it wasn't like that. Just bad luck. Someone added quietly. The experiment wouldn't allow something like that. That seemed to calm people slightly. Scarlett nodded slowly. They would have checked the structures before we arrived. Angelina still looked uncertain. So what happens now? She asked. No one had an answer. They stood in the parking lot of the mall as evening started to settle over the ruined town. Somewhere in the residential district, a body still lay on the hallway floor, and no one from the corporation had come to retrieve it. The blackout had begun, and it would not end for 90 days. Chapter 4. Uneasy Doubt. Word of the death spread across the town quickly. By evening, nearly everyone had heard about it. Small groups gathered around the mall parking lot as the sun dropped lower behind the damaged buildings. Fires were lit using broken wood and debris from nearby structures. People sat in loose circles, speaking in low voices. The mood had changed. The excitement from the morning was gone. Now there was tension in the air. Denzel stood near one of the fires with Scarlett and several others while the story was told again. Door frames snapped, a man said, repeating what the group had already decided to call it. Looked like something was holding the structure together. Another participant nodded. Those buildings are wrecked. Could have been anything. Angelina stood nearby with her arms crossed. You said there was a wire, she said. Denzel looked at her. There was. So that's not a support beam, she said. The group around the fire grew quiet. One woman shook her head. Maybe it was part of the structure holding the door frame together. Angelina frowned. That doesn't make sense. Scarlett stepped in before the argument grew. The buildings are damaged, she said calmly. We knew that coming in. She looked around the group. This whole town is supposed to look like it survived a nuclear disaster. Things are going to be unstable. A man sitting on a crate nodded. Exactly. That's part of the experiment. Someone else added, we just need to be careful. Across the parking lot, another conversation had already turned into a heated argument. Angelina walked over to listen. A tall man stood near the center of the group, speaking loudly. So they're just going to leave him there? He demanded. No one said that, another participant replied. Then where are the researchers? They can't contact us during the blackout. The tall man pointed toward the darkening streets. A guy just got his head cut off and nobody's coming to check on it. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Another woman spoke up. That's not how the rules work. What rules? The man snapped. The contract, she said. It clearly said no communication during the 90-day simulation unless there's a catastrophic event. That sounds catastrophic to me, a few people nodded. Others disagreed. They probably don't even know yet, someone suggested. How could they not know? They said monitoring was remote, another person explained. Maybe they review the data later. So you're saying no one's watching this live? That's what blackout means. The tall man shook his head. That's insane. Denzel stepped closer to the group. What's insane? He asked. Leaving a body sitting in a building, the man replied. Denzel understood the frustration. He had been thinking the same thing. But the contract had been very clear about one thing. No intervention. The town was supposed to simulate total isolation. Scarlett joined them. They'll collect the bodies when the experiment ends, she said quietly. Angelina turned toward her. 3 months from now? Scarlett didn't answer. Across the parking lot, a few people began organizing sleeping areas inside the mall. Others were moving food supplies into a central storage area near the entrance. The work continued. Life inside the simulation had to move forward. But the conversations kept returning to the same question. Why hadn't the corporation responded? One group insisted the researchers must know what happened. Another group argued the blackout meant no one was actively monitoring events. A third group believed something else entirely. "They know," one man said near the fires, "and they're just letting it happen." No one responded to that. The idea hung in the air for a moment before someone changed the subject. Night settled over the island. The ruined town grew quiet. Most participants slept inside the mall again, while a few smaller groups chose nearby houses in the residential district. Denzel lay awake on the cold tile floor near the entrance. He stared up at the broken ceiling panels above him. Images from the afternoon replayed in his mind. The wire, the blade, the way the mechanism had released. It hadn't looked like an accident, but he said nothing, because no one wanted to believe the other possibility. And if that possibility was true, then every building in the town might be dangerous. Outside, the streets remained empty. In the residential district, the apartment building stood silent. Eric's body still lay in the hallway where he had fallen. No vehicles arrived. No researchers appeared. No announcements came over speakers. The blackout continued, and the island remained alone with its 200 volunteers. Chapter 5. Morning came slowly. Most people inside the mall had slept poorly. The conversations from the night before still hung over the group. No one wanted to talk much about the death, but no one had forgotten it either. By sunrise, people were already moving. Work had to continue. Denzel stepped outside the mall entrance and stretched his shoulders. The parking lot was quiet except for a few small groups preparing for another day of gathering supplies. Scarlett approached carrying a notebook she had found inside one of the stores. "Trying to organize inventory," she said. "Food, water, medical supplies, figure out how long it might last." Denzel nodded. "That's smart." Angelina walked out behind them, rubbing her eyes. "I still think they should have contacted us," she said. Scarlett closed the notebook. "They won't." "How do you know?" "Because the contract was very clear," Scarlett replied. "Full blackout for 90 days. Angelina shook her head. "That's ridiculous." Before the conversation could continue, a group of volunteers approached. "Hey," one of them said, "we're heading back to the grocery store." Denzel looked toward the street. "That's where most of the food is anyway." The man nodded. "Exactly." Within a few minutes, nearly a dozen people were walking toward the store again. The streets looked the same as they had the day before. Broken glass, burned vehicles, empty storefronts. The quiet still felt unnatural. When they reached the grocery store, several people moved inside immediately and began continuing the work they had started the previous day. Cans were stacked near the entrance. Cases of bottled water were lined against one wall. Denzel helped move supplies toward the front of the store, where they could be transported back to the mall more easily. Scarlett checked expiration labels again while making notes in her notebook. Angelina wandered through the aisles looking for anything interesting. Near the back of the store, two men stood in front of the large freezer units. "Think there's anything in these?" one of them asked. "Only one way to find out," the other replied. Denzel noticed them while carrying a box of canned food. The freezers were large metal units built into the wall. Most of the glass doors were cracked or fogged from age. One of the men grabbed the handle of a heavy freezer door. "Probably empty like yesterday," he said. Scarlett looked up from her notebook. "Maybe leave those alone," she suggested. "We don't know how stable." The door opened. The moment it swung wide, there was a sharp metallic snap. Denzel's head turned toward the sound. Then the explosion hit. A violent blast erupted from inside the freezer unit. The entire back wall of the grocery store shook. Metal shelving ripped loose and crashed to the floor. Glass shattered in every direction. The shockwave threw several people backward across the aisles. Denzel felt himself slam into the ground. For a moment, his ears rang so loudly he couldn't hear anything else. Dust and smoke filled the air. Someone was screaming. He pushed himself up slowly. The back half of the store was destroyed. One of the men who had opened the freezer lay motionless on the floor. The other was several feet away, bleeding heavily from his chest. Scarlett rushed toward the injured man. "Help me!" she shouted. Denzel staggered forward with her. The man's breathing was shallow and uneven. Shrapnel from the freezer door had torn through his torso. Scarlett pressed her hands against the wound. "Stay with me," she said quickly, but the man's eyes were already losing focus. Within seconds, his body went still. Scarlett sat back slowly. The store was silent except for the crackling sound of something burning near the destroyed freezer units. Angelina stood near the entrance staring at the scene. "What the hell was that?" she said. No one answered. Denzel looked at the twisted metal inside the freezer frame. Something had clearly been installed behind the unit. A mechanical trigger. The door had pulled it loose when it opened. He turned toward the others. "Everyone out," he said. People began moving quickly toward the street. Some were shaking, others looked stunned. Outside the grocery store, a crowd formed as word spread again. 2 more people were dead. Angelina turned toward the group. That wasn't an accident. Several people reacted immediately. It had to be. Gas buildup. Old refrigeration system. Angelina pointed back toward the building. "You heard the trigger." A man stepped forward. "Look, the place is falling apart. You open something breaks." Scarlett walked out of the store slowly. Blood covered her hands. "It exploded the second the door opened," she said quietly. The group fell silent. Another participant spoke. "Maybe the refrigeration system built up pressure. That happens sometimes, especially in damaged buildings." The explanations returned quickly. People wanted them to. They needed them. Angelina shook her head. "This doesn't feel right." Denzel looked around the group. Fear was spreading now, but most of the participants were still clinging to the same belief. The buildings were unstable, the town was damaged. These were tragic accidents, because the other possibility was too hard to accept. Someone finally said what everyone else was thinking. "We should report this." Another man sighed. "To who?" The group fell quiet again. They all knew the answer. There was no one to call, no radios, no phones, no researchers arriving by helicopter, no announcements. The corporation had said the same thing before the ferry left. 90 days, no contact. The blackout would not end until the experiment was over, and they were only on the 2nd day.